Greetings, system failure listeners. Nate here with your weekly essay read, this one entitled Killing Golden Geese, and subtitled How Wealth Addiction Birthed the Middle Ages. The Greek philosopher Plato identified pleonexia as a universal problem in governance and a constant source of economic instability. By that term, he meant the universal human tendency to become wealth addicted to a ruinous degree. The same phenomenon is also expressed in the parable of the goose that lays golden eggs. Pleonexia defined the spectacular rise and fall of Roman society and, by extension, left its mark on the feudal system that grew on the bones of the dead Roman Empire. What is pleonexia? Pleonexia is a term from Plato's Republic that refers to wealth addiction. There's only so much food you can eat and so much wine you can drink. These are natural limits to gluttony and drunkenness. But wealth addiction is a unique problem because it has no such limit. The acquisition of wealth sparks a desire for more wealth, with no hangover period to interrupt the spiral of addiction. Those afflicted tend to chase their addiction to the limits of their capability without regard for social or political consequences. Therein lies the great irony of pleonexia. Time and time again, throughout history, those with the capability to chase wealth addiction cannot resist killing the goose that lays their golden eggs. Pleonexia shaped the rise of Rome. The city of Rome had a king until the local aristocracy deposed him in 509 BC. In Ab Urbe Candida, the Roman historian Livy reports that the king of Rome advised his son to, quote, strike off the heads of the tallest poppies. Livy's famous phrase echoes advice given to Periander of Corinth to, quote, cut down the highest corn stalks. Periander and Solon of Athens were known for using debt forgiveness and land redistribution to revitalize the economies of their respective cities. Republican Rome's founding legend is a tale of rape, suicide, and revenge. However, Livy's phrasing suggests the aristocracy was most concerned that the king might cancel debts owed to them or redistribute their land. In any case, the tale ends with Lucius Junius Brutus ousting the king and installing the Roman Senate to rule in his stead. Membership in the Senate was limited to the aristocracy. By wielding power through it, the aristocracy transformed itself into an oligarchy, and the desire for excess, or pleonexia, dominated Rome's politics from that point forward. Rather than copying the successful policies of Periander or Solon, the oligarchy ruthlessly exploited its working class. Civil unrest and massive general strikes began within decades of the founding of the Roman Republic. The classic way in which the Roman aristocracy soaked the working class was by hoarding for themselves most of the land and slaves that were the spoils of Rome's military conquests. They put their new slaves to work on their new land, driving the price of grain below the cost of production for Rome's free farmers. When these small farmers' income dried up and they were unable to pay their mortgages, a rigid Roman legal system enforced contract terms without regard for social consequences. Periander or Solon might have recommended forgiveness as an alternative to foreclosure. Instead, Rome's small farms were systematically foreclosed upon en masse and sold at distressed prices to the aristocracy, who, in turn, used them to expand their slave-driven farming operations even further. Pleonexia shaped the fall of Rome. Over the course of 5 centuries, Pleonexia drove the Roman aristocracy to amass unprecedented wealth at the terrible cost of social stability. Widespread unrest intensified over those centuries until it finally erupted into civil war during the 1st century BC. The fighting plunged the Italian peninsula into chaos, and hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives. The conflict briefly abated for a couple of years after Julius Caesar decisively crossed the Rubicon with his army and marched on Rome. He seized autocratic power and began implementing land reforms that Periander of Corinth might have approved of. But the state conspired against Caesar and carried out his gruesome assassination in 44 BC, putting a halt to those reforms. Among the conspirators was his dear friend, Marcus Junius Brutus. This Brutus was descended from the Lucius Junius Brutus, who had ousted the king of Rome 5 centuries before. His family's reputation was based on their fierce opposition to kingship. And because Caesar made himself a dictator, that familial legacy compelled Brutus to knife his friend on the floor of Pompey's theater. Because the Roman aristocracy controlled the Senate, it was generally opposed to land reform or wealth redistribution. But Julius Caesar was the rare aristocrat willing to overlook his own financial interest. As a populare, or political representative of the working class, he embraced policies that stabilized the volatile Roman economy at the expense of the rich. For this, the Brutii and Rome's other aristocratic families viewed him as a class traitor. After the stabbing of Julius Caesar, civil war resumed in Italy. But after 17 more bloody years, no one could deny that an autocrat was needed to restore order, since only the autocratic Julius Caesar had ever accomplished that feat. And so the weary Romans finally accepted his grandnephew and adopted son Augustus as the first emperor in 27 BC. The fall of Rome left Europe with feudalism. Neither Augustus nor his successors implemented debt cancellation or land redistribution on a scale that might have prevented the fall of Rome. Julius Caesar had been a unique figure. When Rome's wealthy aristocracy eliminated him, they inadvertently killed the goose that laid their golden eggs, the working class. If he hadn't been murdered, Julius Caesar's policies might have stabilized Roman society. Instead, the desperate working class grew so impoverished under the emperors that they stopped having children and the birth rate collapsed. German mercenaries from the frontier had to be hired to fill out the ranks of the Roman military. The wealth that centuries of military conquest had deposited in Rome reversed course, at first through commercial stagnation, and then by the German armies that repeatedly sacked the Eternal City. In the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire was spiraling into financial collapse. The plague of Cyprian exacerbated the ongoing population decline, and an acute labor shortage prompted workers to demand higher wages. But Diocletian temporarily halted the collapse by fixing wages and prices through imperial decree. His edict on maximum prices also required workers to fill jobs previously held by their parents. That edict significantly shaped the hereditary labor roles that characterized medieval society in Europe. In the 4th century AD, Roman civilization had largely faded from Italy, and foreign armies marched through the streets of Rome. The aristocracy retreated into fortified homes or castles at the centers of their vast estates. Meanwhile, the great masses of the poor were attached to that land as tenant farmers, eventually becoming the medieval peasantry. The rise of these defining features of the medieval feudal economic system marked the beginning of the Middle Ages. Conclusion. Plato identified the human tendency toward pleonexia as a universal threat to political stability. Then the Roman Empire proved his point. The fall of Rome is the story of the Roman aristocracy killing a goose that laid golden eggs, or, as the Roman historian Livy put it, quote, "In the sweetness of private gain, men lost their feelings for the wrongs of the nation," unquote. The insatiable avarice of the Roman aristocracy was a significant factor in the fall of Rome, the glowing embers of which laid the foundation for the medieval feudal system. And later, Plato would again be proven correct about the universal nature of pleonexia when it played a prominent role in the collapse of the feudal system at the end of the Middle Ages. Alrighty, folks. Well, that's the audio essay for this week. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I'd like to invite you to log on to systemfailure.org. There you can view the text format of this essay. You can read the full quote from Livy that's included, and you can also view the title card wherein the assassination of Julius Caesar is vividly illustrated. Furthermore, you can get in touch with either Brian or myself by visiting the About page and clicking on the names you see there. All right, well, I'll be back on Monday with Brian for the regularly scheduled edition of the System Failure Podcast. We'll talk to you all then. Hope you're having a great week.